My name is Maya Hartley. I'm 29 years old, and for my entire life, my family has treated me like a failure, a disappointment, the one who didn't live up to the Hartley legacy of corporate success and social status. My older sister Amanda is the chief financial officer of our family's company, Hartley Enterprises. My twin brother Derek is the chief operating officer. They live in mansions, drive luxury cars, get introduced at parties with pride and detailed accomplishments. Me? I'm the freelance graphic designer who lives in a small apartment and drives a 2008 Honda Civic, the creative one my father mentions with a dismissive wave when he can't avoid acknowledging my existence entirely. The daughter my mother forgets to introduce at social events because my modest lifestyle embarrasses her. What my family doesn't know, what nobody knows, is that I've been secretly wealthy for 6 years. Ever since I invested my trust fund in a tech startup they all mocked me for backing. And that investment turned $500,000 into $52 million. And they definitely don't know that over the past 3 years, I've been quietly buying shares of Hartley Enterprises through shell companies and LLCs, until 6 months ago, when my father sold a large block of his shares to diversify for retirement. And I bought every single one of them. I now own 52% of Hartley Enterprises. I am the majority shareholder, the actual owner, the person with full control over board decisions and executive appointments. And my siblings, who've spent 3 decades treating me like I'm worthless, they work for me. They just don't know it yet. Before I take you back to the moment I revealed this truth and watched my family's world implode, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Then drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to know who's here with me, who understands what it means to be underestimated by the people who should believe in you most. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to growing up as the Hartley family disappointment in a world where only corporate success mattered. I'm the youngest of 3 children born to Thomas and Victoria Hartley. Thomas being the CEO of Hartley Enterprises, a mid-sized manufacturing and distribution company his grandfather founded in 1952, and Victoria, a former corporate attorney who gave up practicing law to focus full-time on charity boards and social climbing, and making sure everyone in their social circle knew exactly how successful and important the Hartley family was. My sister Amanda is 34, graduated from Stanford with an MBA, climbed rapidly through Hartley Enterprises to become chief financial officer by age 31, married a fellow executive named Robert who's equally obsessed with status and money, and lives in a modern mansion that gets featured in lifestyle magazines. She treats family relationships like networking opportunities, every interaction calculated for maximum social and professional benefit. My twin brother Derek is technically the same age as me. We were born 11 minutes apart. But you'd never know we were twins based on how differently our family treats us. Derek followed the expected Hartley path: business degree from USC, immediate position at the family company thanks to pure nepotism, rapid promotion to chief operating officer by age 27. He's the golden son, the heir apparent, the one my father openly discusses as his eventual successor in conversations where I'm standing right there like I'm invisible. And then there's me. Maya. The disappointment, the failure, the one who chose art school instead of business school, who studied fine arts and graphic design instead of finance or operations, who graduated with modest honors and built a quiet freelance career doing design work for small businesses and startups instead of joining the family company. I live in a small apartment in Portland's Pearl District that my family considers rough, even though it's actually a nice neighborhood, full of artists and young professionals. I drive a 2008 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles that still runs perfectly fine. I shop at thrift stores and vintage boutiques because I genuinely love the aesthetic and the sustainability of secondhand fashion. To my family, these choices are proof that I'm exactly what they believe: a directionless dreamer who never grew up, never achieved anything meaningful, never understood what success actually looks like. Family gatherings have been performances of subtle cruelty for as long as I can remember. My father Thomas introduces Amanda and Derek to his business associates with detailed pride, listing their impressive titles and accomplishments, describing their roles in the company with genuine enthusiasm. When it's my turn, when he can't avoid acknowledging my existence entirely, he vaguely gestures in my direction and says something like, "And this is Maya, our creative one," with a tone that makes creative sound like a medical diagnosis, like something unfortunate that happened to me that we all have to politely pretend isn't embarrassing. My mother Victoria is even worse in some ways, because her dismissal is more complete. She often just forgets to mention me at all when introducing her children, or if directly asked, will change the subject so quickly you'd think she was trying to hide a scandal rather than just a daughter who chose a different career path. The dynamic has been brutally consistent for my entire adult life. Amanda and Derek are the successful ones who make the family proud, the ones worth celebrating and supporting and bragging about, while I'm the disappointment who wasted her potential and intelligence on childish artistic pursuits that don't generate real money or real prestige. Every family dinner includes subtle digs about my modest lifestyle, my lack of a real job, with benefits and retirement plans, my apparent absence of any serious ambition beyond making pretty pictures for small businesses nobody's ever heard of. They've offered multiple times to get me an administrative position at Hartley Enterprises, always phrased as charity rather than recognition of my actual skills, always positioned as them generously helping their struggling daughter, instead of acknowledging that I might have valuable talents they could use. My father once literally said at a holiday dinner, in front of extended family and family friends, "We keep telling Maya we could find her something at the company, maybe administrative assistant in HR or reception, but she's too proud to accept help. Some people would rather struggle alone than swallow their pride and accept family support." The condescension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And nobody defended me, because in their world, my father was obviously right, and I was obviously the stubborn failure, who couldn't see that taking a secretary job at the family company was better than continuing to pursue my cute little art career. What the Hartley family doesn't know, what absolutely nobody in my life knows except my lawyer and my financial advisor, is that I've been secretly wealthy for 6 years and have been systematically building toward this moment for 3. 6 years ago, when I turned 23, I received my trust fund from my late grandfather, $500,000 that each grandchild received when they hit that age milestone. Amanda had received hers at 23 and invested it conservatively in bonds and index funds, growing it slowly and safely in ways our father approved of. Derek got his at 23 and immediately bought a Porsche 911 and put a down payment on a luxury condo, spending it on the lifestyle and status symbols he craved. I did something my family considered absolutely insane. I invested every single dollar into a friend's tech startup called Vertex Innovations, a small company developing AI-powered corporate management software that seemed promising but risky, the kind of investment that could return nothing or could explode. My family found out about this investment. I made the mistake of mentioning it at a family dinner, thinking maybe they'd see it as entrepreneurial or bold, and they mocked me mercilessly for months afterward. My father actually announced it at our next big family gathering, like it was a cautionary tale about financial ignorance, standing up during dinner and saying, "Let's all learn from Maya's mistake. She just gambled her entire trust fund on some friend's tech fantasy. This, everyone, is why you don't let your heart make your financial decisions." Amanda and Derek laughed openly, making jokes about my inevitable bankruptcy, about how I'd come crawling back asking for money when the company collapsed, about how this proved I had no business sense whatsoever and should have just given the money to someone competent to invest for me. Vertex Innovations didn't fail. It exploded, in ways none of them could have imagined. Within 3 years, the company was valued at $2.8 billion, had gone public, and my initial $500,000 investment had turned into stock worth $52 million. I sold strategically over the next 2 years, diversified into a portfolio managed by the best financial advisors money could buy, and by age 26, I had accumulated personal wealth of approximately $35 million after taxes and strategic reinvestment. I was wealthier than my sister and brother combined. I was wealthier than my parents. I had more liquid assets than the entire Hartley family's personal holdings outside of the company. And I told absolutely nobody. I maintained my modest lifestyle deliberately and carefully. I kept my same small apartment because I genuinely loved the neighborhood and the space and saw no reason to upsize just to impress people. I kept driving my reliable Honda because it worked perfectly fine, and spending $80,000 on a luxury car seemed wasteful when that money could be invested or donated. I kept shopping at thrift stores and living simply because that's who I actually was, who I'd always been, regardless of my bank account balance. But I had a deeper reason for the secrecy. I wanted to see exactly how my family would treat me when they believed I was still the failure, still the disappointment, struggling along with my cute little art career. I wanted them to reveal their true characters, without the diplomatic mask they'd inevitably wear if they knew I was wealthy. I wanted to understand with perfect clarity whether they valued me as a person or only valued people who had money and status and corporate success. Then I started buying shares of Hartley Enterprises. The company was publicly traded, but with majority control held by my father Thomas, and some long-term investors who'd been with the company since my grandfather's era. I set up multiple LLCs and investment vehicles with my lawyer's help, creating layers of corporate structure that completely masked my identity. And I began purchasing shares quietly whenever they became available. Over 3 years, I accumulated a significant but not controlling position, waiting patiently for the right opportunity. That opportunity came 6 months ago, when my father decided to semi-retire at age 64, wanting to diversify his portfolio and reduce stress, according to the press release. He sold a large block of his shares, 30% of the company, to what was described publicly as a consortium of institutional investors seeking stable manufacturing assets. Those institutional investors were me, every single share. Combined with my previous 3 years of acquisitions, I suddenly owned 52% of Hartley Enterprises. I was the majority shareholder. I was the owner. I had full control over board decisions, executive appointments, company direction, everything. My family worked for me, but I told no one. My lawyers structured everything through so many corporate layers and shell companies that my name never appeared in any public filing or shareholder document. To the board, to my family, to everyone at the company, control had simply passed to some vaguely described consortium of institutional investors represented by a board-appointed representative. That representative reported directly to me, but nobody knew who the actual owner was. Nobody suspected that the disappointing daughter who couldn't even get a real job was now the person who controlled their entire professional lives. I maintained my modest lifestyle even more carefully after the acquisition. I wanted my family to continue revealing exactly who they were. I wanted to see the full scope of nepotism and incompetence at the company before I made my move. And I wanted them to have absolutely no warning, no chance to prepare or spin a narrative when the truth finally came out. The revelation began at my parents' 35th wedding anniversary celebration, held at an exclusive country club with over 200 guests in attendance. It was exactly the kind of lavish affair designed to showcase the Hartley family's success and social status and importance. Amanda arrived in a designer gown that probably cost $5,000, with her executive husband Robert in a custom tuxedo. Derek brought his girlfriend Sienna, a former model he'd been dating for 3 months and treating like a trophy he'd won. I came alone in a vintage 1960s cocktail dress I'd found at a consignment shop for $45, having driven my old Honda that I had to park in the far overflow lot because it looked so out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs and Teslas filling the main parking area. During the formal dinner portion of the evening, my father Thomas stood to make a speech, He was in his element, surrounded by wealthy friends and business associates, celebrating his successful marriage and his successful life, about to brag about his successful children. 35 years ago, he began, his voice carrying that performative warmth he used at corporate events. I married the love of my life, Victoria. Together, we didn't just build a marriage, we built a legacy. We built a family. We built a business that employs over 300 people and contributes to this community. Applause from the crowd. He waited for it to die down before continuing. I'm so proud tonight to announce that legacy continues into the next generation. My daughter Amanda has just been officially promoted to Chief Financial Officer of Hartley Enterprises, and my son Derek to Chief Operating Officer. They represent the future of our family business, and I couldn't be more proud of what they've accomplished. The applause that erupted was thunderous. Amanda and Derek stood from their seats and did a small bow, beaming with pride and satisfaction. People were clapping and cheering like they'd just won awards instead of getting promotions at a company owned by their father. Thomas waited for silence again before delivering the line I'd been waiting for, the one that told me everything I needed to know about whether he'd changed at all in the 6 months since I'd secretly bought his company. Building a successful business empire requires sacrifice and dedication and vision, he said, his tone turning slightly more serious. But above all, it requires family commitment to shared values and goals. I'm blessed that 2 of my 3 children inherited those values and chose to dedicate themselves to continuing what my grandfather started 70 years ago. 2 of 3. The emphasis was subtle but unmistakable. He didn't say, my other daughter chose a different path, or my youngest followed her own dreams. He said 2 of 3 inherited the values, the implication crystal clear that the 3rd child, the one he didn't even bother naming, had failed to inherit what mattered. Multiple guests glanced at me where I sat at a table near the back, some with pity, others with that particular schadenfreude people feel when witnessing family drama that isn't theirs. My mother, Victoria, sitting beside me because someone had to babysit the disappointing daughter, touched my arm with performative sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Don't feel bad, darling," she said in a voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Not everyone is cut out for corporate life. You have your art and your little design projects. That's valuable too, in its own way." I smiled politely and said nothing, just took a sip of my water and checked my phone under the table. I had an email from Richard Chen, the new CEO I'd personally recruited and installed 3 months ago when I'd used my controlling ownership to replace the previous CEO who'd been too close to my father and too willing to overlook incompetence in executives who happened to be family. Richard was a brilliant executive I'd found working at a manufacturing company in Seattle, someone with zero connection to the Hartley family, who would evaluate everyone based purely on merit and performance, rather than last names and nepotism. His latest email outlined his findings after 3 months of careful assessment. "Maya, as discussed, I've completed my review of executive performance. Amanda's financial management has masked several accounting irregularities and risky investment strategies that expose the company to approximately $8 million in potential liability, plus regulatory penalties for improper reporting practices. Derek's operational restructuring has resulted in 12% efficiency decline, 18% cost increase, and 34% employee turnover in key departments. Both executives have been protected from accountability by previous leadership. I'm prepared to present these findings to the board at next week's meeting and recommend immediate suspension pending investigation. However, given your family relationship, I wanted to confirm, do you want me to proceed with full transparency, even though this will likely destroy your relationships with your siblings and parents? I'd responded simply, proceed with complete transparency, no exceptions for anyone. Family relationships are irrelevant to corporate competence. The anniversary party continued with more speeches, more champagne, more celebration of Amanda and Derek's success, and the bright future of Hartley Enterprises under their leadership. At one point, Derek approached my table with Sienna in tow. That particular swagger he had when he was feeling superior and wanted to make sure everyone around him felt inferior. "Maya, this is Sienna. Sienna, this is my sister Maya. Well, my twin sister, technically, though you'd never know it from looking at our lives." He laughed at his own joke. "Maya's a freelance artist. She does like logos and stuff for small businesses." The way he said freelance artist made it sound like a communicable disease. Something unfortunate that had happened to me that we all had to politely pretend wasn't embarrassing. "Oh, how interesting," Sienna said, with the forced enthusiasm of someone who'd been trained to be polite, even when talking to people she considered beneath her social class. "Do you sell your work in galleries? I have a friend who works at a gallery downtown. I could maybe introduce you if you want to try to get your work shown." Before I could explain that I did commercial design work, not fine art for galleries, Derek laughed and cut me off. "Maya mostly does logo designs for like mom-and-pop shops and startups that can't afford real agencies. It's cute, really. Our bohemian sister keeping it real, while the rest of us are in the corporate world making actual money." He said it with such casual cruelty, like he wasn't even trying to be mean, but just stating obvious facts about our different levels of success and worth. "Someone has to be the free spirit in every family," Amanda added, gliding over with a wineglass in hand, and that superior smile she'd perfected over years of being the golden child. Maya never cared about money, or status, or success in the traditional sense. She's always been more about self-expression and following her passion. The way she said self-expression made it sound like a character flaw, like something weak people did when they couldn't handle real careers. "I'm happy with my choices," I said calmly, sipping my water and watching them perform their superiority. "Of course you are, darling," my mother Victoria said, approaching with my father in tow, ready to join in the family tradition of making sure I knew my place. "We've completely accepted that you march to the beat of your own drummer. We just wish that drummer paid better, so you didn't have to struggle so much." She said it with such fake concern, like she was genuinely worried about my financial situation, rather than using my perceived poverty as a way to put me in my place. Thomas chuckled, that particular sound he made when he found something amusing, in a condescending way. "The offer still stands, Maya. We could find you something at Hartley Enterprises, if you ever decide you want stability. Maybe administrative assistant in HR? Or we might have an opening in reception soon. It's not glamorous, but it's steady income with benefits." Better than the unpredictable freelance lifestyle, where you never know where your next paycheck is coming from. Administrative assistant, receptionist, entry-level secretary positions. These were the roles my father was offering me, while my siblings had just been promoted to CFO and COO, while standing in front of 200 people at a celebration of the family business I secretly owned. The condescension was so breathtaking, it almost made me laugh. "I appreciate the offer, Dad," I said with a pleasant smile. "But I'm quite satisfied with my current professional arrangement." "Pride," Victoria sighed dramatically to the gathered family members who'd accumulated around us to witness this performance. She'd rather struggle alone than accept help from family. It's very sad, really. We've tried for years to bring her into the business, to give her opportunities, but she refuses every time. "I'm not struggling, Mom," I said quietly, still maintaining my calm smile. "I'm doing fine." Derek actually snorted, that dismissive sound he'd perfected in high school when mocking people he considered beneath him. "Maya, you drive a car from 2008 and live in that tiny apartment in the Pearl District that probably costs barely $1,200 a month. If that's not struggling by any reasonable definition, I honestly don't know what is." "Different people define success and happiness differently," I replied, my voice steady even as I watched them all nod to each other, like I'd just proven their point about my lack of ambition and understanding of how the real world worked. "That's very true," Amanda said, with the false wisdom of someone who thought they were being magnanimous and understanding. "Some people genuinely value creative fulfillment over financial security and professional achievement. It's a valid life choice, even if it's not one I personally would ever make. We should respect Maya's different priorities." The conversation moved on, the family drifting away to other tables and other guests, leaving me exactly where I'd always been in family gatherings: marginalized, dismissed, patronized, made to feel small and unsuccessful and less than. But this time I wasn't hurt by it. I wasn't crying in the bathroom, or going home to question my worth, or wondering why my own family couldn't see my value. This time I was analytical, observing the patterns of dismissal and condescension that my family had perfected over 3 decades, cataloging exactly how they treated me when they believed I had nothing and they had everything. This time I was watching them reveal who they really were, without any mask or filter, showing me with perfect clarity that money and status were the only things they valued, that I had never mattered to them as a person, and never would. That night after the party ended, and I drove home in my beat-up Honda, I sent Richard Chen a text message. "Board meeting confirmed for next Tuesday at 10 a.m. I'll be attending in person to reveal ownership and present full restructuring plans. Prepare comprehensive documentation on all executive performance reviews, with particular focus on CFO and COO." Richard responded within minutes. "Understood. This is going to be explosive. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this publicly rather than privately?" I typed back without hesitation. "Completely certain. They've had 30 years to treat me with even basic respect. They chose not to. Every single day for 3 decades, they chose to make me feel worthless. Now they face the consequences of who they chose to be. I need to pause here for a second because this is the moment I want you to understand. I wasn't doing this out of spite or revenge or cruelty. I was doing this because a company with 300 employees and their families depending on it for their livelihoods deserved competent leadership, not nepotistic incompetence protected by family connections. I was doing this because Amanda and Derek had been given positions they hadn't earned and couldn't handle, and the company and its workers were suffering for it. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't also a part of me that needed my family to see exactly how wrong they'd been about me, exactly how catastrophically they'd underestimated and dismissed and devalued their own daughter and sister. If you've ever been the one your family treated like you'd never amount to anything, drop "underestimated" in the comments. And if you've ever had to watch incompetent people get promoted over qualified ones just because of their connections, type "nepotism." Subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens next, the board meeting revelation, the moment they realize their worthless sister owns everything they've built their identities around, is something you won't want to miss. The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. in the Hartley Enterprises downtown headquarters, a gleaming office building I'd visited countless times growing up, but always as the CEO's disappointing daughter, never as what I actually was, the owner. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored suit I'd commissioned from a designer friend, but had never worn in front of my family, my hair professionally styled, carrying a leather portfolio that cost more than my car, but looked understated enough not to draw immediate attention. The receptionist looked completely confused when I walked past security toward the elevators instead of sitting in the waiting area. "Miss Hartley? Do you have an appointment with someone? Your father isn't here today. He's retired now. And the board meeting is—" "I know about the board meeting," I said pleasantly. "I'm attending it." Her confusion deepened into obvious bewilderment, but before she could ask any follow-up questions, Richard Chen emerged from the elevator, right on time as planned. "Maya, perfect timing," he said with a slight smile. "Let me show you to the boardroom." The receptionist's eyes widened. "You know her?" she asked Richard, like the concept of the CEO knowing the disappointing daughter was impossible to process. "Quite well," Richard said calmly. She's the reason I was hired. We rode the elevator to the executive floor in comfortable silence. Richard briefed me on who would be attending. The 8 board members, including Amanda and Derek as executive board members, plus my father Thomas, who still attended meetings as chairman emeritus, despite being officially retired. "How do you want to handle the revelation?" Richard asked as we walked down the hall toward the boardroom. "Start with the performance reviews, exactly as planned," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Present your findings objectively. When they inevitably object or claim family protection, or try to dismiss your concerns, I'll reveal ownership and make it absolutely clear that family relationships are completely irrelevant to corporate performance standards and accountability." The boardroom was exactly as I remembered from the few times I'd been allowed inside as a child, during Bring Your Daughter to Work Day events, where Amanda got to shadow executives and I got to color in the corner. Mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, high-backed leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland. Board members were already gathering, chatting casually about golf and stock markets, and the usual small talk of wealthy executives. Amanda and Derek sat together near my father at one end of the table, looking confident and comfortable, and utterly secure in their positions of power and prestige. When I walked in behind Richard, the conversation stopped like someone had pressed pause on a movie. All eyes turned to me with varying degrees of confusion, surprise, and annoyance at this unexpected presence. "What is she doing here?" Derek asked, not bothering to hide his irritation or lower his voice. "This is a board meeting, not a family reunion." Thomas, seated in the chairman emeritus position at the head of the table, despite no longer having any real power in the company, frowned deeply. "Maya, this is a closed board meeting. It's not appropriate for family members who aren't part of company leadership to attend. You'll need to—" "Miss Hartley is here at my specific invitation." Richard Chen interrupted smoothly, his voice carrying authority that made my father's frown deepen. "As is her right as a shareholder of this company. Please, Maya, take a seat." I sat in one of the chairs along the wall, the area typically reserved for advisors or observers who weren't board members themselves. Amanda whispered something to Derek, who shrugged, both of them clearly annoyed by my presence, but not concerned about it. After all, what could their failure sister possibly do or contribute to a serious business meeting? Thomas looked like he wanted to object further but didn't, probably not wanting to create a scene in front of the other board members by throwing out his own daughter. Richard called the meeting to order and began working through the standard agenda: quarterly financial reports, operational updates, routine business items. I sat quietly, taking notes, watching the board members interact and make decisions about a company I owned, but they didn't know I owned. Then Richard reached the critical section on the agenda. "Item 7, Executive Performance Review," he said, and his tone shifted to something more serious, more concerned. "As the newly appointed CEO, I've conducted comprehensive performance assessments of all executive leadership over the past 3 months. I need to share some very concerning findings with this board that require immediate attention and action." He pulled up a presentation on the large screen at the front of the room. The first slide showed detailed financial data from Amanda's tenure as CFO. "Our Chief Financial Officer has implemented several investment strategies and financial instruments over the past 18 months that have exposed this company to significant and unnecessary risk. Specifically, I've identified unauthorized derivatives trading, off-balance sheet financing arrangements, and accounting practices that violate our fiduciary standards and potentially several financial regulations." Amanda's face went from confident to white in about 3 seconds. "Those were all approved strategies," she protested immediately, her voice higher than normal. "My father, the previous CEO and leadership, were fully aware of all financial decisions and strategies. Everything I did was within my authority as CFO." "Were they aware?" Richard asked mildly, clicking to the next slide which showed email correspondence. Because I have documentation showing you specifically concealed several transactions from board oversight and failed to disclose the full risk exposure in your financial reports. The potential liability here is approximately $8 million in exposure, with additional regulatory penalties if the SEC decides to investigate our reporting practices. Thomas stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. This is absolutely outrageous. Amanda is one of our most talented executives. These accusations are baseless and clearly motivated by... They're documented with evidence I'm prepared to present to the board and to outside auditors if necessary, Richard said calmly, cutting him off. Let me continue. Our Chief Operating Officer's performance shows similarly serious concerns that require board attention. The next slide showed operational metrics under Derek's 18-month tenure as COO. Since taking over operations, we've seen efficiency decline by 12%, operational costs increase by 18%, and employee turnover in key departments rise to 34%. The restructuring plan he implemented has been, by every measurable standard, an objective failure that's cost this company money and talented workers. Derek's face flushed bright red with anger and embarrassment. You can't judge complex operational changes in just 3 months. These are long-term initiatives that require time to show results. You're deliberately misinterpreting data to make me look bad because you want to bring in your own people. I'm judging based on 18 full months of comprehensive data, Richard interrupted calmly. The decline started the month you took the COO position and has accelerated consistently. Additionally, HR has documented multiple complaints about hostile work environment, nepotistic favoritism, and retaliation against employees who questioned your decisions. Complaints that were systematically ignored or buried by previous leadership. This is a witch hunt, Derek shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You brought in some outside CEO with no loyalty to this family to attack us. This is a coup attempt. I was brought in to run this company professionally and competently, Richard said evenly. Family relationships are completely irrelevant to executive competence and performance. Both of these executives are significantly underperforming, exposing the company to substantial financial and legal risk, and creating toxic work environments that are driving away talented employees. I'm recommending immediate suspension of both executives pending full independent investigation, with potential termination for cause depending on what that investigation reveals. The boardroom exploded. Thomas was shouting about loyalty and family values and unacceptable betrayal. Amanda was crying, claiming she was being scapegoated for decisions that weren't entirely her responsibility. Derek was threatening lawsuits and making accusations about Richard's motivations. Several board members tried to speak over each other, some clearly defending the siblings out of loyalty to Thomas, others looking genuinely concerned about the documented evidence being presented. I sat quietly and watched it all unfold, watched my family reveal exactly who they were when their power and status were threatened, watched them deflect and blame and refuse accountability. Then, when the chaos reached its peak, I stood up. If I may, I said quietly. The room didn't immediately quiet. My voice was too soft to carry over the shouting and crosstalk. Richard noticed and picked up his gavel, banging it hard against the table.
Order, please,
he said firmly.
Miss Hartley would like to speak.
Now everyone turned to look at me, confusion on most faces about why the disappointing daughter was being given a voice in a serious board meeting about executive performance.
Who cares what she thinks?
Derek said dismissively, his voice dripping with contempt.
She doesn't even work here. She has no idea how this company operates.
Actually, I said, my voice steady and clear. I own it. Complete silence. Absolute, total, stunned silence.
What?
Thomas said finally, the word barely audible. I opened my leather portfolio and removed a document, handing it to Richard, who began distributing copies to each board member. What you're looking at is the complete corporate ownership structure of Hartley Enterprises. If you trace through the various LLCs, shell companies, and investment vehicles listed on that document, you'll find they all ultimately answer to a single beneficial owner: me. Amanda grabbed her copy of the document, scanning it frantically with shaking hands. This can't be. This has to be some kind of fraud or mistake. I currently own 52% of Hartley Enterprises, I continued calmly, as if I was discussing the weather rather than dropping a bomb that was destroying my family's entire understanding of reality. I've owned controlling interest for 6 months, since purchasing all the shares my father sold when he decided to retire. I've been quietly acquiring shares for 3 years before that through various corporate entities, specifically designed to mask my identity and intentions. Thomas was staring at the ownership documents like they were written in a language he didn't understand, his face cycling through shock and confusion and dawning realization.
You? But you can't possibly. Where would you even get the money to buy? You're a freelance designer who can barely... 6 years ago, I invested my trust fund in a tech startup called Vertex Innovations, I said. And I watched their faces as they remembered, as they recalled mocking me for that investment and calling me financially illiterate. You all laughed at me, called it stupid and reckless, proof I didn't understand money or business. Dad literally used it as a cautionary tale at family dinners about what not to do with investments. But that stupid investment in my friend's tech company, it returned over 100 times. My $500,000 became $52 million. I've been wealthy for years. You just never noticed, because you were all too busy looking down on me and my modest lifestyle to consider that maybe I was choosing to live this way, rather than being forced to by poverty. Derek's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out.
Amanda's tears had stopped from shock, her face frozen in an expression of absolute horror as she realized what this meant. I installed Richard as CEO 3 months ago, specifically to evaluate this company with complete objectivity, without the family bias and nepotistic protection that's allowed incompetence to thrive, I continued. What he found confirms exactly what I suspected. Amanda, your financial management has been reckless at best and potentially criminal at worst. Derek, your operational leadership has been an objective disaster that's damaged this company's performance and culture. Both of you have been protected from any real accountability purely because of your last name and your relationship to the previous CEO. That ends today. Maya, sweetheart, Victoria started, her voice shaking, her usual perfect composure completely shattered. Surely we can discuss this as a family, privately, without all these strangers present. This is a family matter that should be handled. We're not discussing this as a family, I interrupted firmly. We're discussing this as a board of directors addressing executive performance in a company I own. Family relationships ended being relevant the moment you all spent 3 decades treating me like a failure and an embarrassment. This is business. This is about running a company properly, instead of using it as a vehicle for unearned executive positions for underqualified family members. Thomas found his voice, though it cracked with emotion. You've been lying to us, hiding your wealth, hiding your ownership, manipulating and deceiving your own family for years. How can you do something like this to the people who raised you? I haven't been lying, I said calmly. I've been existing quietly while you revealed your true characters. I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing, when you believed I was still the struggling artist with the cute little career. And you showed me exactly who you are. People who measure human worth entirely by money and status, who have no respect for anyone they perceive as beneath them, who see family as a hierarchy to be climbed, rather than a bond to be cherished. I turned to Richard. Proceed with your recommendations exactly as planned. Suspend both executives immediately pending full investigation. If the investigation confirms your findings, which I'm confident it will, terminate them for cause, with no severance or special treatment. I want this company run based on merit and competence. not family connections.
Maya, please,
Amanda whispered, her voice breaking.
we're your family, your sister and brother. You can't do this to us. We grew up together. We're blood.
You're people who happen to share my DNA. I corrected her gently. Family is supposed to be people who respect you, support you, value you for who you are. You've never been that. You've been bullies with a good last name, using family connection as a weapon to maintain superiority over someone you perceived as lesser. Well, now that lesser person owns everything you've built your identities and careers around. How does that feel? The board meeting concluded with Richard's recommendations approved. My 52% controlling vote made the outcome inevitable, regardless of what anyone else wanted. Amanda and Derek were suspended immediately, effective that moment, pending a full forensic investigation of their activities. Security was called to escort them from the building and revoke their access credentials. Thomas stormed out without speaking another word, his face purple with rage and humiliation. Victoria tried to approach me, tried to appeal to me emotionally, tried to beg for mercy for her children, but I calmly asked security to escort her out as well when she wouldn't leave the boardroom voluntarily. Over the following weeks, the independent investigation confirmed everything Richard had found, and worse. Amanda had indeed engaged in unauthorized high-risk trading that exposed the company to millions in potential losses, had structured several transactions specifically to hide them from board oversight, and had violated multiple financial reporting requirements. Derek's operational changes had been driven by ego and inexperience, rather than any data or best practices, and he'd created such a toxic work environment that the company was hemorrhaging talented workers while overpaying incompetent ones who happened to be his friends, or who flattered him enough. Both were terminated for cause with no severance package. The family's response was exactly what I expected. Rage, accusations of betrayal, public statements to their social circle painting me as a vindictive daughter who'd used hidden wealth to cruelly persecute her innocent siblings just because she was jealous of their success. Some people believed their version of events. Others, who'd witnessed the family dynamics over the years, quietly reached out to me with messages of support and admiration for finally standing up for myself. I didn't engage with any of the family drama. I worked with Richard to implement proper corporate governance and oversight, to establish clear performance metrics and accountability systems, to recruit truly qualified executives based on competence rather than connections. Within 6 months, Hartley Enterprises showed measurable improvement in every performance category. Finances stabilized, operations became more efficient, employee satisfaction scores rose dramatically, and the company's reputation in the industry improved. Thomas refused all contact with me, telling extended family members and anyone who would listen that he no longer had a youngest daughter. Victoria made periodic attempts at reconciliation, but they were always transactional, focused on getting me to rehire Amanda and Derek, or give them severance money, or somehow undo the consequences of their own incompetence and misconduct. She never once acknowledged how they'd treated me, never apologized for 3 decades of dismissal and condescension, never seemed to understand that I wasn't punishing them out of spite, but holding them accountable for actual documented failures. Amanda and Derek both found new positions eventually, though not at anywhere near the executive level they'd enjoyed through nepotism. Amanda took a mid-level analyst position at a smaller company, where her actual skills, moderate and unremarkable, were appropriate to her role. Derek bounced between several operations management jobs, struggling to adjust to work environments where being the CEO's son didn't provide automatic protection from accountability. 1 year after the board meeting revelation, I received a letter from my father. It was brief and bitter. "You've proven you're smart and successful, and ruthless enough to destroy your own family. Congratulations. But you'll never prove you're a good daughter. What you did to your siblings and to this family is unforgivable. We're done." I read it once, felt a brief moment of sadness that he still didn't understand, and filed it away without responding. I'd never been trying to prove I was a good daughter. I'd been trying to establish that I deserved basic human respect and dignity, regardless of my career choices or income level. The fact that Thomas still couldn't see the difference, still couldn't acknowledge that he'd treated me with contempt and cruelty for 30 years, told me everything I needed to know about whether reconciliation was possible, or even desirable. Instead, I focused on building the life I actually wanted. I continued running Hardly Enterprises remotely through Richard and the board, while maintaining my own design business that I genuinely loved. I built relationships with people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I'd achieved or how much money I had. I discovered that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something meaningful, and then being completely indifferent to whether the people who hurt you ever acknowledge it. 2 years after taking control of Hartley Enterprises, I attended a charity gala where my family was also present. The first time we'd been in the same room since the board meeting. Amanda and Derek saw me and immediately moved to the opposite side of the room, clearly wanting no contact whatsoever. Thomas and Victoria, however, approached me with what looked like nervousness and hope, clearly wanting some kind of reconciliation, or at least civility for the sake of appearances in front of their social circle. "Maya," Victoria said carefully, her voice tentative in a way I'd never heard before. "It's been far too long. Perhaps we could have dinner soon? Just family. Try to clear the air and move past all this unpleasantness?" "I appreciate the offer," I said politely, "but I'm quite content with things as they are currently." "Surely you don't intend to cut us off forever," Thomas said, and I could hear desperation under the attempt at authority in his voice. "We're still your parents. Despite everything, we're still family." "You're the people who raised me," I corrected him gently. "But being biologically related doesn't obligate me to maintain relationships with people who treated me poorly for decades, and have never genuinely acknowledged or apologized for that treatment. I hope you're both well, but we don't have anything to build a relationship on." Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story reminded you that being underestimated can be an advantage when you're playing the long game, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Have you ever been dismissed or looked down on by people who later realized they made a huge mistake? I read every one. If you know someone who's been treated like they'll never amount to anything by the people who should believe in them most, share this with them. Hit subscribe for more stories like this. I'll see you in the next one. Remember, the people who underestimate you are giving you the element of surprise. Use it wisely.